The whisper on the range out, in the wind-swept outskirts of Montana, where the sky stretches wide like a promise and the mountains crouch like slumbering beasts, lived a woman named Ellie Mae Carter. Most folks around town would describe her in 2 words: simple woman. They didn't mean it cruelly. It was more like she blended in so well with the land. You almost forgot she was there until you needed her. Quiet, kind, a lover of black coffee, stray cats, and old country ballads. But what they didn't know was this: Ellie Mae had the soul of a sniper and the patience of a saint. And that combination, well, it was about to make headlines. Ellie lived on a modest patch of land that had belonged to her late father, a rancher who taught her how to mend fences, ride horses, and fix just about anything with duct tape in common. Since he also taught her one thing that would one day change her life forever: how to shoot, not for sport, not for ego. Just clean, efficient, respectful handling of a rifle. Because out here, wolves don't wait for help to arrive. As a child, Ellie could hit a soda can from 100 yards with a rusty .22. By the time she turned 18, she could clip the stem off a daisy from 500 yards without touching a single petal. Not that she ever bragged. Bragging wasn't in her nature. Ellie wasn't a show-off. She was a show-dash-up. She stayed behind after her father passed, living quietly in the same weathered farmhouse, working odd jobs in town, and helping the local sheriff when needed. They called her Deputy Dus because she was always there. But hardly seen now. The town of Brook Hollow Falls wasn't exactly the epicenter of law enforcement action. The most exciting thing that happened all year was the annual chili cook-off, and that one time a cow wandered into the mayor's office and refused to leave. But one summer, something unusual happened. A group of SWAT trainees from out of state came to the region for their field survival and sniper training. Instructors thought the quiet, wide-open land of Montana would be perfect for testing advanced tracking, locations, and precision in isolated settings. The town was buzzing. Half of them were excited. The other half were just wondering if it meant better coffee at the diner. Ellie, she just kept going about her business. That is, until Sheriff Donnie Briggs knocked on her door with a smile too wide to be innocent. Ellie. He said, chewing gum and mischief at the same time. "You're gonna love this. I'm already suspicious," she said, wiping her hands on a towel. "There's a shooting challenge happening at the SWAT camp. Open field. Long-range stuff. They're letting locals try for fun. No, for laughs? For laughs? Well, yeah. These are top-tier trainees. Sharpshooters in the making. They want to, quote, give the locals a taste of the action." Ellie raised an eyebrow. "You mean they want to show off?" "Maybe, but I thought you might like to take a swing." Ellie paused. She hadn't picked up her old rifle in months. Life had been quiet, steady, uncomplicated. "All right," she said slowly. "I'll come watch." Donnie grinned. "Even better, bring your rifle." When Ellie walked into the makeshift camp, everything stopped for a second. Not because she was intimidating, quite the opposite. She wore jeans and old flannel, and boots worn from years of honest work. Her braid was messy, and her stance was casual. A few of the SWAT recruits, young, proud, testosterone-powered, looked her up and down and did what young men do when they feel challenged. They laughed. "Is that your grandma?" One muttered, "Here to make cookies?" Ellie just smiled politely. They weren't mean-spirited, just green. They had all the gear in the world: brand-new tactical vests, top-dollar scopes, and rifles that probably cost more than her truck. She had an old bolt-action rifle passed down from her father, and a canvas bag that looked like it belonged in a war museum. The instructors, more seasoned, more respectful, greeted her kindly, but even they wore that amused smile that said, "She's in for a lesson." What they didn't know was that Ellie had already been through her lessons. Life had taught her plenty. The test was simple in theory, brutal in execution. Target: a metal silhouette the size of a pie plate at 1,000 yards. Wind: unforgiving. Conditions: no scope assists, no rangefinders. Just instinct, timing, and raw skill. Each recruit got 3 shots, only to hit. The rest either missed or grazed the edge. Then Ellie stepped up. She didn't say a word. She laid prone, adjusted her sight manually, took a breath as deep as the valley winds, and fired, clang, dead center. The laughing stopped. Second shot, clang, bullseye. Again, third shot. She waited. The wind shifted. She fired, clang, split. The last shot through the first. Asterisk, nobody clapped at first, not because they weren't impressed, but because they were stunned. Genuinely, totally dumbfounded. Ellie sat up, dusted herself off, and nodded. "Y'all have a good afternoon," she said, tipping her cap. Then she walked off quiet as she came. The instructors were silent. The recruits looked like they'd just seen a ghost. Sheriff Donnie. He was grinning like a raccoon with a bucket of fried chicken. Asterisk. One of the recruits, bless his millennial heart, recorded the whole thing. Uploaded it with the title, "This grandma just destroyed a SWAT team in 3 shots. Who is she?" Within a week, the video hit 2 million views. By month's end, she had offers from news networks, survival schools, and even a Netflix documentary. Scout but Ellie. She turned them all down. "Not interested in fame," she said. "Just making sure folks remember skilled, don't wear fancy clothes." Asterisk, what the video didn't show was what came after. The quiet moment when one of the youngest recruits came up to her. "Ma'am," he said, still red-faced. Can you teach me how to shoot like that?" She looked him up and down, not at his gear, but at his heart. "You willing to learn quiet?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then I'm willing to teach." Ghosts in the Windley, Mae Carter didn't grow up dreaming of rifles, targets, or praise. If you had asked her what she wanted to be when she was 10, she might have said something as tender as a schoolteacher or as steady as a librarian. Her childhood was defined by the smell of wild sage, the hum of locusts in the dry heat, and the sound of her father's deep voice teaching her that real strength was quiet. "Loud folk are like thunderstorms," he used to say, rubbing his calloused hands together over a cup of percolated coffee, a lot of noise and not much rain. It was under that kind of parenting, equal parts love, discipline, and prairie philosophy, that Ellie learned the value of patience, the art of silence, and the incredible power of focus. Her father, Samuel Carter, was no ordinary rancher. A veteran of Korea, he had once been a scout sniper, though he rarely spoke of it. Ellie only knew because she'd once found an old footlocker beneath the floorboards in the barn. Inside were medals, black and white photos, and a letter from a general calling her father irreplaceable. She had returned it to its place without asking him a single question. If he wanted her to know, he'd tell her. He never did, but in his actions every time he corrected her grip, adjusted her elbow, or told her, breathe like the shot already happened, she felt the echo of something deeper than hunting deer or protecting livestock. As Ellie grew older, life didn't gift her with grand adventures or city lights. Her mother had passed when she was young, and it was just her and Samuel for most of her youth. She worked the land, learned the rhythms of weather and soil, and found joy in simplicity. While other girls in town went off to college or moved to bigger cities, Ellie stayed. Not because she couldn't leave, but because she felt no reason to. She was one of those rare souls who felt rooted in place like a cottonwood that refused to be transplanted. But fate, as it does, had its own way of waking up a quiet life. It was late autumn, the air sharp with the first signs of snow, when tragedy struck. Samuel had gone out to mend a fence line near the ridge. He was 72, but still as stubborn as a bull in rut. When he didn't return by sunset, Ellie saddled her mare and rode out. She found him at the base of a steep embankment, his leg twisted badly beneath him, his face pale. He had fallen. There was no cell service out there, no one for miles. Ellie spent 6 cold hours hauling him onto a makeshift sled with rope and tarp, pulling him through the dark terrain by hand until they reached the truck. He survived the night, but past 2 weeks later, his body too tired, too old to keep up with his will. Losing him fractured something in Ellie, though you wouldn't have known it from the outside. She didn't cry at the funeral. She didn't pack up and leave. She just settled deeper into the land, like it was all she had left. In some ways it was. Years passed. She aged gracefully, but alone. A few neighbors tried to play matchmaker, but Ellie wasn't interested. Her life was measured in seasons, not romances. She worked when there was work, helped when others asked, and spent her spare time caring for animals, repairing old machinery, and reading books from the town library she donated to every year. No one ever saw her shoot anymore, though every once in a while she'd step outside at dusk, raise her father's rifle, fire a single shot into the hills for no other reason than to remember how it felt. So when the sheriff had asked her to join that SWAT challenge, it wasn't about proving anything to anyone. It was about honoring a part of herself she had buried respectfully. But too early, the aftermath of the video going viral was, in a word, surreal. Reporters started showing up at the diner where she got her coffee. People who'd never spoken to her at the post office now wanted selfies. Letters arrived from viewers around the country, many thanking her for showing that strength isn't tied to uniforms or youth. One email stood out among the rest. It was from a woman named Sergeant Alicia Morin, an instructor at a federal sniper school in Arizona. Ms. Carter, watched your clip a dozen times. Not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. We've been looking for someone like you, someone who could teach what can't be found in textbooks. We don't need a soldier. We need a ghost. Ellie didn't reply at first. She wasn't one to be flattered into action. But the letter lingered in her thoughts like a song stuck on repeat. Something about being needed again, being asked not for show, not for social media, but to teach spoke to her. For the first time in a long time, she didn't just feel useful, she felt necessary. Still, old habits die hard. Before committing, Ellie took a drive along one. She packed her truck with snacks, a thermos of tea, and her father's rifle, and headed out across the state toward a place she hadn't visited in over 30 years. Broken Leaf Ridge. This wasn't just a destination, it was the site of a memory she had never fully unpacked. At 19, Ellie had once considered enlisting in the military. The recruiters had loved her score's top percentile in vision, precision, reaction. But when it came time to ship out, her father sat her down on the porch and said, "You don't have to be a soldier to serve. Ellie, just because you can shoot, don't mean you have to. But if you go, make sure it's your choice, not because you feel like you owe it." She never went. Not because she was afraid, but because she realized he was right. She hadn't wanted the war. She just wanted to matter. And she did matter in her own quiet way, for decades. Now, 30 years later, she stood on that same ridge, wind in her face, eyes scanning the valley, and she asked herself a new question. What if now is the time? Not to fight, but to teach. And in that moment, she knew. When she got back to Brook Hollow Falls, she didn't announce it. No speeches, no Facebook posts. She simply wrote back to Sergeant Moran, "I'm in, but I do it my way." No fancy introductions. No stage lights. I teach in the field or not at all. The reply came fast. Deal. The townsfolk barely noticed when Ellie packed up a few belongings, locked her house, and hit the road again. Most assumed she was just visiting relatives. Maybe going to one of those women's retreats her cousin always tried to drag her to in reality. Ellie Mae Carter was about to step into a world filled with drones, ballistic simulators, and high-tech. Warriors who thought they'd seen everything until they met a woman who could put a bullet through a bottle cap from half a mile away. With a rifle older than they were, but she wasn't coming to impress them. She was coming to show them something that had been forgotten in all their training. Something that couldn't be downloaded or manufactured. Something passed down through whispers, dust, time, discipline, instinct, patience, and heart. Because Ellie Mae wasn't a legend, not yet, but legends. They tend to begin where most folks stop looking. The rifle and the revolution, the drive to Arizona was long, dry, and strangely beautiful in its own right. Ellie Mae Carter never used GPS. She didn't trust machines to guide her spirit. Her directions came from memory, landmarks, and the crumpled paper map she kept folded in the glove box, faded along the creases from years of use. She drove with the windows down, letting the desert air whip through her hair and bring back that old feeling, the one she hadn't felt in decades. The feeling that something important was ahead, waiting quietly just around the bend. Not a storm, not a battle. A purpose. When she reached the entrance to the U.S. Tactical Precision Training Facility, better known by its shorthand, the pit, She wasn't impressed by the gates or the shiny signage. She didn't blink at the guards in mirrored sunglasses or the security cameras tracking her old Ford as it chugged up the gravel path. No, Ellie Mae had seen enough of the world to know that power didn't always wear a uniform. Authority didn't always come with sirens. The place was built like a fortress cut into the sandstone, like a buried secret. The facility sprawled. Like a shadow, underground bunkers, ranges that stretched miles into the desert. Wind tunnels, simulation domes, and tactical arenas that mimicked every kind of battlefield from snowy mountains to urban ruins. The pit wasn't just a sniper school. It was a crucible, designed to push humans to their mental and physical brink. Graduates from here didn't just earn badges. They earned the kind of trust you didn't question in a crisis. When Ellie pulled up to the main barracks, the reception was cold, literally and figuratively. The inside of the building hummed with air conditioning and skepticism. Cadets in matching tactical gear moved in tight formation down the corridors. Young sharpened men and women with crisp posture and tighter jawlines threw quick glances her way, but not one of them offered a word. They saw the flannel shirt, the dusty boots, the duffel bag slung over her shoulder like she was headed for a fishing trip. Most assumed she was a visiting groundskeeper or worse, someone's lost grandma. It wasn't until Sergeant Alicia Moran stepped out of her office that anyone looked twice. Former Marine with a stare that could freeze lava, Alicia walked. With purpose and the faint limp of someone who'd left part of themselves on foreign soil. She extended her hand, and Ellie took it with a firm grip, neither squeezing to prove anything nor hesitating. Just enough to say, "We understand each other." "Glad you made it," Alicia said, tilting her head slightly. "You ready?" Ellie didn't reply with a speech. She never had one prepared. Just a nod. I'd nod. Steady as a church bell at dawn was enough to make Alicia smirk. "I've arranged for you to observe first. Some live fire drills. Then, if you're comfortable, we'll start phase 1 of the mentorship." "Observation's fine," Ellie said. "But I didn't drive 1,000 miles to sit in the bleachers." That afternoon, she stood behind a group of 6 trainees during a high-angle marksmanship exercise. The task was brutal. Target a steel plate no bigger than a notebook. Across 1,200 yards of uneven terrain with 8-mile-per-hour crosswinds and simulated pressure tactic sirens, explosions, and artificial heat blasts. The recruits were good, technically flawless. Calculating elevation, windage, barometric data with devices clipped to their belts. Most hit the target on the second or third try. Then Alicia handed Ellie the clipboard. "You want to go? I've got a loaner rifle set up." Ellie looked at the sleek jet-black sniper rifle, with a scope that looked like it belonged on a satellite. She smiled faintly, then shook her head. "I'll use mine." There was a moment of hesitation. A few cadets chuckled. One, a square-jawed young man named Torres, leaned over to his friend and whispered, "She's got that Annie Oakley energy. What's she gonna do? Scare the target into falling over?" Ellie knelt calmly, pulled her father's bolt-action rifle from the case, and checked the scope, an old relic with no digital readouts, just crosshairs and instinct. She took one breath, closed her eyes, and when they opened, they were focused not in a dramatic movie-style squint, but with the serene stillness of someone who doesn't need to force what already lives inside them. She didn't use earplugs, didn't ask for adjustments, didn't even check the wind. She just aimed, fired. The steel plate rang out, like a bell struck by truth. Dead center, the silence that followed wasn't ordinary. It was reverent. A few of the instructors who had wandered out to see the special guest shifted uncomfortably. It's not that they hadn't seen good shots before. They had, but this wasn't a good shot. It was surgical, ancient, as if the bullet had. Asked politely before landing, Alicia turned to the group. "Any of you want to critique that form?" No one answered. Over the next week, Ellie taught not from a podium, but from the ground. She refused to enter a classroom. "You don't teach shooting in air conditioning," she told Alicia. "You teach it with dirt in your boots and sweat in your eyes." Her methods confused the recruits at first. She gave no lectures, handed out no pamphlets. Instead, she told stories, usually while cleaning rifles or walking through the hills. She talked about instinct, timing, knowing when not to shoot. She taught patience by making them sit in the sand for hours, not allowed to move until the wind whispered the right moment. She had them listen not to orders, but to the land. Some resisted. Torres especially seemed to bristle every time. Ellie gave feedback. He was technical, fast, efficient, but not calm. He chased perfection and missed it by inches every time. One day, she sat beside him after a particularly bad series of shots and said, "You know what your problem is? I'm not hitting dead center." "No," she replied. "You're trying to control the shot, but the shot's already happened. The moment you breathe in, your body's already written the outcome. The bullet's just the messenger." Didn't understand it then. But 3 nights later, during a dusk simulation, when he stopped calculating and just listened, his shot sang through the desert with the same haunting ring as Ellie's had. He didn't smile, just looked at her. She nodded once. That was enough. As word spread through the base, Ellie began to earn a nickname among the trainees, the Whisper. Not because she spoke softly, but because her presence had the uncanny ability to silence doubt. She didn't bark orders or shout motivation. She merely was. And somehow, that was louder than anything the instructors could offer. But not everyone was impressed. A former intelligence officer turned instructor named Barrett took issue with Ellie's unorthodox style. He claimed she was romanticizing the art of shooting, turning it into folklore instead of science. One evening, in front of Alicia and the rest of the command staff, he confronted her directly. "This isn't a Western movie," he sneered. "These kids need data, not campfire wisdom." Kelly didn't raise her voice. She looked him in the eyes, unflinching. "They've got your data. It got them 90% of the way. I'm here for the last 10. Which is what exactly?" She leaned in, her voice calm. "Trust and heart. The kind of things you can't print on a graph." Later that night, Alicia handed Ellie a file, confidential, redacted in some areas, but it told her everything she needed to know. "You were right," Alicia said. "Barrett's been lobbying to turn the whole program into a machine-fed pipeline. He wants AI sniper interfaces in 5 years. Ellie didn't need convincing. She just closed the file and replied, "That's how you lose wars you never see coming. A machine can hit the target. Only a human knows why." The real challenge was coming. Not just with bullets or tests, but with trust, reputation, and what it meant to carry a legacy in a world moving too fast to notice the wisdom falling behind. Because Ellie Mae Carter wasn't just training snipers, she was raising guardians. Echoes of steel by the 3rd week. Something had shifted in the desert air around the training facility. The mood inside the compound had turned quieter, more focused, not because the recruits were scared or stressed, but because something about Ellie Mae Carter's presence had settled in their bones like a memory they hadn't realized they missed. It wasn't discipline she imposed. It was reverence she inspired. Cadets who once scoffed at her slow, deliberate pace now found themselves echoing her mannerisms, unconsciously checking the wind with a raised hand instead of a sensor, adjusting their breath in sync with the earth around them instead of trusting. A display screen. Ellie's mentorship wasn't based on hierarchy or command. She didn't pull ranks. She didn't even have one. Yet somehow she had become the gravitational center of the program. It wasn't loud and it wasn't announced. It was just real. Real had a way of making everyone else feel a little less. Artificial Sergeant Alicia Moran. A battle-tested Marine who had trained dozens of elite teams, observed the evolution with quiet awe. She'd seen students rise and fall under pressure, seen egos crumble and reforge into professionals. But she had never seen this. Ellie had become a lens through which the cadets began to see themselves more clearly. The results weren't just in tighter groupings or lower reaction times. It was in the way they held themselves, the way they moved. On the range, not with aggression, but with awareness. Like hunters, not hammers. But not everyone appreciated the shift. Tensions inside the instructor ranks had begun to stir. The military-industrial rhythm that powered the academy was rigid, predictable, and unyielding. Ellie's presence, though, quiet, was disruptive. She didn't fit the mold. Worse, she was proving it might be the mold itself that needed rethinking. Major Travis Barrett, head of tactical sciences, wasn't subtle about his disdain. To him, Ellie represented a dangerous nostalgia one that threatened to drag precision training back into a world of gut instinct and emotional intelligence. He believed in algorithms, analytics, and machine calibration. Motion, he had once told a class of recruits, has no place on the trigger finger. And yet here was this woman from Montana, degree, no decorations, no pedigree, writing the language of lethality, one quiet moment at a time. The breaking point came during the night op gauntlet, test designed to simulate real-world crisis environments. 12 cadets were dropped into a 5-square-mile blackout zone, armed with a standard-issue sniper rifle, one magazine, and a GPS beacon. The exercise was simple on paper. Locate the target, neutralize with a single shot, and exfiltrate. Within a 4-hour window, no drones, no coms. Just you, your rifle, in the dark. Ellie was asked to co-observe the operation from the monitoring station, along with the corps instructors. It was the first time she would be placed directly within the system she had been quietly working outside of, and her presence was met with tight jaws and cold stares. Still, she sat silently in the corner, her eyes fixed on the wall of screens showing thermal feeds, heartbeat monitors, and motion tracking. She didn't take notes. She didn't speak unless spoken to, but she watched everything. The first 2 hours unfolded as expected. Cadets moved with tactical efficiency, fanning out through the dark with practiced discipline. Their gear glowed like constellations in the infrared spectrum. 2 recruits overshot their mark and had to loop back. Another got pinned down by a simulated enemy drone and lost 25 minutes before regaining ground. The instructors made notes, checked boxes, and murmured jargon. Then something strange happened. One of the feeds cadet, Mitchell, sharp and usually methodical recruit, went dead. Not offline, but flatlined. His vitals dropped, location froze, an alert blared through the room. Simulation injury, said a technician. Vitals non-responsive. No signal from beacon. Leisha stood up instantly. Where's the recovery? Team Barrett tapped the console. Standby protocol. Let's not overreact. This is probably a tech fault. But Ellie was already moving. She had watched Mitchell's trajectory from the beginning, memorized it without needing a screen. His rhythm had shifted 10 minutes before the alert. His gait had faltered, his pauses longer. She had felt it, even if the machines hadn't. That boy's not fine, she said sharply. His pacing was off before the feed dropped. He's not down because of tech. He's down because he's scared and alone. Barrett scoffed. You can't feel a recruit's mental state from a chair, Miss Carter. Let protocol handle this. Ellie turned slowly, her stare piercing as the desert sun. Protocol didn't teach him how to survive panic. I did. And if I'm right, he's not going to press that emergency beacon. Thinks failing this test is worse than failing to live. Leisha didn't hesitate. Ellie, what do you need? Access to his entry path. And my rifle. Minutes later. Ellie was suited up in lightweight gear and moving through the dark like a ghost. No beacon, no night vision. Just memory, instinct, and a rifle that hadn't missed in 20 years. The other instructors watched in stunned silence. Barrett fumed, pacing like a caged dog, muttering about liability and breaches of procedure, but no one stopped her. Ellie didn't track Mitchell by heat or light. She tracked him by patterns. Same way she'd tracked lost cattle in the mountains or coyotes across icy ridges. She remembered the way his posture had changed when he was under pressure during drills. How he clenched his jaw to hide panic. How his breathing rose just before he missed a shot. She found him curled behind a rock formation, rifle clutched in, trembling hands, face pale and slick with sweat. He was hyperventilating, lost in the dark, afraid to press the beacon and mark himself as a failure. Ellie didn't speak at first. She simply knelt beside him and set her rifle down quietly. Ever feel the dark get so loud you can't hear yourself think? She asked softly. Mitchell didn't answer. She nodded, as if he had. You're not weak, son. You're just not breathing right. That's all. Everything else? You already survived it. Slowly he turned his head. She could see it, the flicker of doubt beginning to give way to relief. She gave him a moment. Then, together, they walked back through the dark, steady, 1 foot at a time. Back at the facility, Mitchell was checked, cleared, and declared stable. The incident was logged as a field stress response. Nothing unusual on paper. But everyone in the observation room knew what had just happened wasn't standard. It was a rescue, yes, but it was something more. It was proof that the soul of a sniper wasn't found in numbers or software. It was found in how you held your breath when it mattered most. The next morning, Alicia called an all-hands meeting. Cadets, instructors, admins. She stood at the front of the auditorium, Ellie beside her. "There's a debate happening," Alicia said without ceremony. "Some believe we're training machines. Others believe we're training guardians. What happened last night wasn't part of the syllabus. It wasn't in the curriculum. It wasn't in your manuals. But it's the lesson. That might save your life one day." She looked at Ellie. "Ms. Carter isn't here to take us backward. She's here to take us deeper. Deeper into the part of ourselves that can't be programmed." Barrett stood, face red. "So we're handing over doctrine to a woman with no formal military background? No rank? No authority?" Ellie stepped forward slowly, voice even. "I don't need a rank to save your people. I don't need a badge to teach them how to trust themselves when their tools fail. All I've ever needed is time, and you've already given me that." The room was silent. Barrett said nothing further. From that day on, Ellie's role became official. Not as a replacement for the system, but as a vital counterbalance. She taught instinct where formulas stopped. She reminded them that the most dangerous person in a battlefield wasn't the one with the best gun, but the one who could wait. Listen, choose. The recruits began to call her something new, now not the whisper. "Ma'am." They called her steel, because she wasn't fire. She wasn't fury. She was something stronger and far more enduring. The eye of the system. By the 4th week of her stay at the pit, Ellie Mae Carter had become more than just a mentor. She had become a quiet insurgency. It's not the kind that shakes walls or shouts into megaphones, but the kind that seeps beneath protocols and changes people from the inside out. She had trained the cadets in silence and subtlety. But what she was really teaching them was courage, the kind that wasn't loud or proud, but rooted in instinct, empathy, and a kind of mental stillness that didn't show up on charts. Even as her influence grew among the cadets, it was beginning to stir fear in the veins of those whose power depended on control, not conviction. The command wing of the facility wasn't just a nerve center. It was a fortress of policy, procedure, and polished intentions. It was here, behind bulletproof glass and steel-locked doors, where decisions were made that shaped the direction of tactical education across the entire region. It was here that Major Travis Barrett had begun laying the groundwork to remove Ellie from the program, not because she was ineffective, not because she was wrong, but because she was right, and that terrified him more than failure ever could. Barrett believed in the future. He worshipped at the altar of precision metrics, digital coordination, and next-gen warfare. The rise of artificial intelligence and targeting systems, predictive behavior algorithms, and tactical drone strategies were his gospel. And Ellie, with her analog methods and her human-first philosophy, represented a threat to everything he had built his name on. In private meetings, he'd begun referring to her influence as emotional drift, a soft corruption. As he described it, that made soldiers think instead of execute. The him thought was hesitation, and hesitation was death. The strategy to remove her wouldn't be direct. Barrett was too experienced for open confrontation. He preferred pressure, policy, and paperwork. He started by digging into Ellie's background, requesting every piece of information he could, extract public records, employment history, even family obituaries. He assumed there would be a flaw he could exploit, some detail that disqualified her presence here. What he didn't expect was to find nothing but clean lines, quiet living, and a record of unassuming service. No scandal, no debts, not even a speeding ticket. But he did find one detail, one thread he thought he could pull. Ellie had once applied to a federal law enforcement agency. The file was old, buried in archives, but it showed that she had passed every physical and psychological evaluation with flying colors until the final round of review. There she had voluntarily withdrawn from the process. No reason given, no explanation offered, just a single sentence typed into the record, not the right kind of war. Barrett smelled blood. He summoned a closed-door meeting with the board of oversight, the panel that oversaw civilian involvement in government-affiliated training facilities. Using the file as leverage, he claimed Ellie's presence was built on undisclosed history, emotional instability, and a refusal to fully integrate into the military chain of command. He used words like non-compliance, unverified psychological risk, and pedagogical inconsistency. He requested her removal within 72 hours. Word traveled fast. As it always does in places where people pretend it doesn't, Alicia Morin heard it from a staff clerk who overheard a heated exchange near the tech bay. Within the hour, she stormed into the command chamber, her face locked in the kind of fury only earned through betrayal. She demanded answers, called the maneuver cowardly, and refused to authorize Ellie's removal without review. Barrett, cool as a snake in shade, handed her the printed documents and told her that due process was in motion. Ellie, meanwhile, had already sensed it coming. She hadn't needed whispers or rumors. The tension in the corridors, the shifting glances, the sudden chill and administrative tone, it all spoke louder than any official memo. She didn't panic, she didn't push back. She simply walked to the firing range that afternoon, as she always did, and trained with the same calm purpose she'd brought on day one. That night, as dusk painted the desert in bruised lavender, Alicia found her there, sitting on the edge of the range, her rifle across her lap like a familiar dog. "They're moving to cut you out," Alicia said. No preamble. Barrett's pulling every thread he can find. She stared across the flat land ahead, the wind teasing strands of her silvered hair. "He thinks I'm dangerous," she said. "More as a statement than a complaint." "He thinks you're unmanageable," Alicia corrected. "Which, in a place like this, is practically the same thing." Ellie gave a slow nod, her voice low. "He's not wrong." Alicia sat down beside her, stretching her tired legs. "I've trained under some of the hardest instructors this country ever produced. Been yelled at, pushed, broken down, and built back up again more times than I can count. But I've never seen anyone change the room just by entering it." "That's not a tactic," Ellie murmured. "That's just gravity," Alicia chuckled. Softly. "Well, your gravity's starting to shift things higher up than even I can protect." "Barrett's already got half the board in his pocket. If this goes to a full vote, I'll be gone," Ellie finished. "I know." But then, for the first time, Ellie Mae's stillness cracked not into panic, but into purpose. She stood, slung her rifle over her shoulder, and turned to Alicia. "If they're going to silence me," she said, "they'll have to do it in front of the people I came here to teach." The next morning, Ellie walked into the central training. Not quietly this time, but deliberately, with her presence loud in its steadiness. The cadets, in the middle of pre-dawn drills, stopped. One by one, eyes turned. She walked to the open training platform where lectures were sometimes given, climbed the short steps, and stood in the center. "I wasn't asked to speak," she began, her voice cutting through the morning stillness like a rifle crack. "But I'm going to anyway, because you deserve to hear it from me, not from a hallway whisper or a PDF memo." She looked around, not at the instructors, not at Alicia or Barrett, who had just stepped out into the periphery, but at the cadets. Her cadets. "They're going to remove me," she continued. "Not because I failed you, but because I changed. I taught you to think when you were told to act. I taught you to feel when you were taught to shut it out. I taught you to trust yourselves when the systems around you want you to be a function, not a fighter. And that scares people." Silence. Tension rippled through the crowd, slow and potent. "I don't need to stay. This place isn't mine to keep, but what is mine? What I did come here to give you already have. It's in your breath." "Aim your decision-making when no one's watching." She paused, then added softly, "They can fire me, but they can't unteach you." Barrett stepped forward then, trying to reassert control. This facility is not a stage for personal drama, he barked. Remove her. But before the guards could move, Cadet Torres, once Ellie's most vocal skeptic, stepped forward. Then Mitchell, and 3 more, until the platform was surrounded by a wall of bodies, standing in silent formation. Alicia stepped forward last. You want her gone, Major? She said, her tone hard and cold. Then you'll have to file dismissal. Paperwork for every single cadet who trained under her? Because we're not learning what you think we are. We're learning what we need to. Barrett's jaw twitched. He said nothing, turned and walked off, leaving silence in his wake. The board didn't vote that week. In fact, they postponed the review indefinitely. Ellie remained. Not because she fought to stay, but because others finally learned how to fight for what mattered. When the quiet speaks loudest, the desert has a strange way of knowing things before they happen. Long before reports hit the wire, long before alarms blared, and long before the boots began to move, the sky over the pit had already begun to change. A stillness hung in the air, thicker than the silence before a shot, heavier than the anticipation before a storm. It was the kind of quiet that had weight to it, the kind that people like Ellie Mae Carter had learned not to ignore. The morning started like any other. Cadets were performing zero-visibility navigation drills. Instructors moved between databases, and Barrett, still fuming quietly from his failed campaign to oust Ellie, was cloistered in his office, buried in reports designed to reassert control. Alicia was reviewing the new class roster in the communications wing. Lee was walking the eastern perimeter of the range with Cadet Mitchell and 2 new trainees. The rest of the campus buzzed with its usual mechanical rhythm, until the rhythm stopped. At precisely 09 for 3 hours, a single distress signal lit up the command bay. It wasn't a training alert or a system glitch. This was a live-coded security breach, coming from a supply convoy en route to the facility. Now 15 miles out, and accelerating erratically toward the restricted zone perimeter, the pit's protocols were immediate. Lockdown, surveillance, activation, and emergency coordination with the nearest federal enforcement branch. What they weren't prepared for, what no system in place had accounted for, was the fact that the convoy wasn't being hijacked by strangers. It was one of their own. A dismissed former instructor, discharged months ago under quiet circumstances involving psychological instability and illegal tactical experimentation. The man had slipped through cracks in the federal system, and no one had flagged the stolen credentials until it was too late. His plan wasn't complex. It didn't have to be. He had knowledge of the base's response, timing, entry gates, and access points. His vehicle was packed with enough stolen explosives and signal jammers to wipe out half the compound. And his manifesto broadcasted to every security channel once. He crossed the outer gate was a grim declaration of vengeance against the softening of war. Alicia heard the alert first and bolted toward the situation room. Barrett followed, barking orders, trying to contain the panic that was already seeping through the facility's walls. Evacuation of non-combat staff began immediately, while instructors began rallying cadets to designated defense zones. But there was no time for perfection. The convoy was too close, the risk too high. And then, in the scramble, someone asked the question no one wanted to answer out loud. Who's got the best shot from this distance? They didn't say it for long, because every pair of eyes, cadets, instructors, even the techs, turned toward the east screen, toward the woman already moving before the request had even finished echoing. Ellie Mae Carter. She had seen the dust trail before the radar had, felt the shift in air before the loudspeakers screamed, and when she saw that, vehicles swerving with desperation and purpose across the landscape, she didn't ask questions. She just dropped to one knee, unslung her rifle, and began her breath work. Cadet Mitchell fumbled his radio. "Ma'am, Ellie, what do you need?" "Quiet," she said, her voice calm. "I need everything to be quiet." She didn't need a drone feed. She didn't need range data or wind speed. She needed focus. She needed stillness. And she needed to remember every lesson her father had ever whispered in that sun-worn field back in Montana. Don't rush. Let the shot come to you. Her rifle, that ancient bolt-action piece of family history, had no modern targeting system. No smart scope, just old metal and trust. She adjusted the scope manually, cranked the focus, and watched the vehicle begin to breach the final checkpoint. 10 seconds to impact. Football field's length away from the main training dome. Inside it, nearly 100 cadets and instructors scrambled for cover. The facility's automated defense turrets had been jammed by the attacker. There was no tech left to save them, just Ellie. One breath, she could see him now, through the cracked windshield. Face twisted in madness, hands locked on the wheel. The vehicle had one vulnerable point, a narrow gap above. Doom! The engine housing where a shot could trigger the detonation away from the main facility and vaporize the payload before it reached critical proximity. 9 seconds. She inhaled slowly, feeling the dry air wrap around her lungs like an old friend. Her finger tightened, not on impulse, but on rhythm. And then right as the front tires crossed into the final 100-meter zone, she exhaled and fired. The sound wasn't loud. It was crisp, like a nail tapping the edge of a wine glass. The rifle bucked gently. The world paused, then dashed the truck. Jerked, burst into a sweeping arc of flame, and exploded in a geyser of fire and sand that collapsed into itself like a dying star. The pressure wave rocked the facility. Windows shattered. But no lives were lost. Not a single one. And in the center of the chaos, Ellie remained knelt in the dust, her rifle cooling in the dry breeze, her eyes steady and unreadable. For a few seconds, there was nothing but ringing ears and disbelief. Then, slowly, cadets emerged from shelters, instructors came out of the bunkers, and Elisa, her uniform scorched at the collar, heart-hammering, ran toward the eastern ridge. She found Ellie there, standing now, brushing sand from her pants, as if she had merely done some gardening. "You all right?" Alicia asked, breathless. Ellie nodded. "Didn't come here to miss." Word spread like fire. Not just in the pit, but across the network of training facilities, law enforcement divisions, military academies, and newsrooms. Videos captured by external surveillance feeds hit the public within hours. Headlines spun faster than fact-checkers could keep up. Some called her a hero. Some called her a relic. But all agreed on one point. A woman with no rank had saved 100 lives with one shot. Federal officials arrived within days. Awards were proposed. A special medal, a congressional citation, even a book deal. She turned down every single one, politely, without bitterness. "I didn't do it to be remembered," she said to the camera crews that showed up anyway. "I did it so the right people could be." The pit changed after that, not overnight. Not publicly, but behind closed doors, the doctrine shifted. Barrett was reassigned. Alicia was promoted to Director of Tactical Philosophy, a position that hadn't even existed before Ellie came. And Ellie herself? She left the following week. No parade, no farewell speech. Just packed her things, left a handwritten note on Alicia's desk that said, "Don't forget to teach them the quiet stuff," and drove away into the desert without a backward glance. But her story didn't end there. It only changed locations. Whispers began to emerge across the country of a woman who appeared in small towns and border outposts, teaching new recruits how to breathe under pressure, how to wait without fear, how to fire with purpose instead of panic. Always quiet, always unannounced. A ghost with steel in her, hands and wisdom in her eyes. Some say she's retired now. Back in Montana, tending to a modest garden and watching the sun rise over the hills her father once walked. Others claim she's still out there, moving from base to base, teaching those who will listen and outshooting those who won't. But everyone who met her remembers. One thing above all, she wasn't just the best shot they'd ever seen, she was the one who taught them how to aim at life. The end.